Celeste Headley is with us today, courtesy of Savannah State University and Bob and Linda Zerb. Celeste is the host of the Georgia Public Broadcasting program On Second Thought, as well as a previous co-host of The Takeaway and Midwest correspondent for National Public Radio's Day to Day, and a classically trained soprano. And in between all of this, she's even written a book called We Need to Talk. It's a very good book about communications and one that I'm going to have my wife read very soon. Please give me a warm welcome to Celeste Headley.
I'm a Buddhist, so this feels a little uncomfortable. We've tried it the other way for a really long time. For generation after generation, we have taught our children and ourselves that if something's going to cause an argument, we don't talk about it, right? But it used to be that we didn't talk about politics and religion, and now we've added race, and we've added climate change, and we've added guns. And eventually, we're just going to add everything until we're just not talking about anything that's difficult anymore. And when you don't talk to people unless they agree with you, and you don't talk to people if you're never going to be challenged, it means you're not learning anything new about the subject. And you have to forgive me if I get a little bit emotional, because after the shooting in Florida last week, I keep seeing these headlines and these quotes from people saying it was an unspeakable tragedy. And it's not unspeakable. It has to be spoken of. We have to speak about it. And I honestly could not care less what your views are. We all of us, most of us, have people in our families that disagree with us, right? That's what makes holidays so awkward. You can get along with people who don't agree with you. You can talk to them. And instead of avoiding these subjects that lead to an argument, you have to learn to talk about them without arguing. And it is much easier than you think. So I just want to start with telling you exactly how to do that. And there's a number of steps, they're all going to help you, but there's really only one. And that is, stop trying to change people's minds. Stop trying to convince them that you're right and they're wrong. When was the last time you had a disagreement with someone and at some point in the conversation they went, you know what, I am completely wrong, you are right. I have totally changed my mind. It doesn't happen. I mean, science can tell you that, but that's another one of those no-duh studies, right? I mean, I could go into research after research that tells you that we don't change our minds over the course of a conversation, but we already know that. Pardon the lozenge, I've been talking a lot over the past week. And the attempt to change people's minds is making us all frustrated and miserable. So part of the reason that we're arguing about it is because we're trying to change people's minds and it's not going to happen. And you're basically beating your head against a wall repeatedly and repeatedly and repeatedly, and then thinking, well, I'm never going to do that again. Well, it's not the exercise, it's the beating of the head against the wall that's making you upset. Don't do it anymore. You have zero control over what someone else thinks, over the way they view things. That is 100% not in your control, but guess is what is in your control. You, what you think, what you hear, what you listen to. So if instead of going into these conversations saying, all right, I'm gonna have it out, I got my points, I'm gonna score points, I'm gonna win this debate, that's gonna make you upset. Instead of doing that, go into every conversation and say, I'm not gonna leave this conversation until I've learned something. And you can accomplish that 100% of the time. I don't care, you know, guns at this point is more divisive as a voting issue than race, abortion, same-sex marriage, marijuana. Really? Really? We can't talk about firearms? I don't care if you're a member of the NRA. I can talk to you about it. How many of you know everything that you need to know about guns and you don't need to listen to anybody else, ever, because you have nothing to learn about it? I don't care if you are a gun owner. You really think you know everything about guns? I own a smartphone. I don't know everything about that phone. There's lots of stuff I own I don't know anything about. There is no issue on which you can tell me you are the ultimate expert and you have nothing to learn about it. That is not true. And that means you're going to have to change your habits. And again, I'm sorry, I'm tired of trying of our entire society doing the same thing over and over and over again. And then throwing up our hands and going, they called me an idiot. Of course they did, because they didn't listen to you. And it's possible you didn't listen to them. If we plan to progress, you can't stand on principle. It's literally in the phrase. You're just standing. You're not going anywhere. How many of you made promises at some point in your life about the things you were going to do or not do? I am never going to. And then ended up. When I had a kid, actually when I was pregnant, I swore I was never going to raise my voice to my child in anger. Yeah. We all make principles in our heads. And it's ridiculous to think you're going to stand by them and they're never going to change. They're going to change. But the way that they change is by realizing you don't know everything. And what I didn't realize was that my son was going to be a huge pain in the butt. You have to evolve. I mean, right now we're not evolving, and the reason we're not evolving is because we have put our own comfort above everything else. And here's the thing about being comfortable. Comfort is the enemy of innovation and growth. We have created bubbles around ourselves, and we've done a great job of it. I mean, I could point to you all the research from Pew. They have incredible authorship and academic research going on in which they are basically telling us the same thing over and over. One of their reports is called The Spiral of Silence. Because social media, which we dreamed was going to open up conversation, we thought social media was going to make people who were nervous about raising their voice and stating their opinion. We thought it was going to embolden them and open up the conversation and make it more free and tolerant. And it did the opposite. It turns out that people who get shut down on social media are less likely to have a face-to-face conversation. Social media is actually shutting down conversation in real life. It's doing the opposite of what we thought. That's why they call it the spiral of silence. We thought that the smartphones in our hands, which at their heart are a phone, we thought they would increase the number of conversations that we have. But at this point, the average American, and actually this research is about 3 years old, so I bet it's worse. But at this point, the average American adult spends 30 minutes a day texting and about 6 minutes or less on the phone. Companies like Coca-Cola, Cisco, JP Morgan, Goldman Sachs have used their phones so little they've eliminated voicemail systems from their phone systems. They don't pay for it anymore because it's not used. But here's the thing. Your smartphone is a crappy replacement for conversation. I do not know why we keep inventing new replacements for the thing that human beings do better than any other species. And listen to me, it is probably the only thing we do better than other species. I'm not even trying to be funny here. We all know that in a one-to-one fight, we lose out with a mosquito. We are not impressive. But the one thing that we do well, the reason we have dominated on the planet, is because we collaborate. Because when you mess with one human, you're usually messing with a bunch of other humans. That is why we've succeeded. That is the formula we're messing with. We are breaking it. Because we think each and every one of us, Google has tricked us into thinking we are all a few clicks away from being an expert in everything. We are beginning to think we are in and of ourselves enough, or maybe our family unit, our small little tribe, and it is not true. There is no replacement for the human voice, none. It is so complex, in many ways magical. Science cannot explain how it works. There's research going on at Princeton right now into what's called neural coupling. And basically what they did was they had one person come in, they hooked him up to an fMRI. You guys know what an fMRI is. It's a functional magnetic resonance imaging machine. It allows us to watch the brain thinking while the person is conscious. So they would hook someone up to an fMRI, and they'd have them tell a story from their life. In this case, in one case, she told the story of a disastrous prom. And then they had a whole bunch of other people come in and listen to her telling this story. And they found something really miraculous. They found out that when these people were listening in an engaged way to this other woman talking, their brains synced up. They moved in perfect sync. In fact, it was so exact at times that the listener's brain would anticipate changes in the speaker's brain by a fraction of a second. That is mind meld. I mean, if we saw it in Star Trek, we wouldn't think it was realistic. But that is what happens when a pair of human ears listens to a human voice. We can't explain it. We don't know how it works. We don't know why it works. But we know that that is something humans do that other species can't. We can bond with one another. We can reach one another on a level beyond what science can track. And that is what we're trying to replace with emojis. Seriously, you can't. There's all kinds of ways that technology just can't replace what you can do with your voice. And I'll give you another example, apologies. The process that begins with an apology and leads eventually to forgiveness and moving on, it's a relatively complicated physiological and neurological process. Everybody take your finger and put it at the top of your right ear. Move it up 1 inch and move it back 1 inch. That's the compassion center of your brain. And when the process of forgiveness begins, you have to get an apology in some form, and your compassion center goes on. And that is what leads you through the whole rest of that process that makes you able to forgive that first person and forget about it. If someone reads an apology in any form, nothing happens here. If you send an apology by email or, God forbid, text, nothing. Crickets. Why do we avoid calling the person or seeing them to apologize anyway? Why do we do that? It's easier. That's right. That is exactly right. It is tough to say you're sorry to somebody. It's really tough. And it's painful. And guess what? When you're apologizing to someone and they either hear or see that it is tough for you, bing, the compassion center lights up. And then the process begins. The apology is effective because it's hard. And if it's not hard, there's no point. This is another way in which you cannot replace human communication between one voice and one pair of ears. And Listen, there are tons of things humans do terribly. There are lots of ways that our smartphone can fill in for things that we're not great at. I mean, our brains are not computers, right? Our memories are bad. We are bad at storing information and then recalling it when we want to. So that's what a computer's for. That's great. That's awesome. And like it or not, even though most people can't find their way home from the grocery store without their phones anymore, GPS is pretty awesome. We used to have to rely on people to give us directions to their houses. Remember that? And some people are terrible at it. And after following their crappy directions and getting lost, you get to their house and you're like, hi. Yeah. That doesn't happen anymore. You don't have to get angry at your friends and family members for giving you terrible, terrible directions. You have a GPS. That's fantastic. Mine, I use Waze. It even tells me if there's a traffic jam, which is always because I live in Atlanta. There are plenty of things for us to use technology for, but not conversation. There's no replacement. It can't be improved upon at this point. And the other part of that is the adoption of smartphone technology has been so rapid. As of, I think it was 2003, only maybe 10% of American adults in the United States owned a cell phone. Raise your hand if you own a smartphone right now. Over 90%. In fact, in the world today, according to the United Nations, more people have access to a cell phone than have access to a working toilet. That is incredibly rapid growth. And it has outpaced our ability to understand the effect. Because clinical studies take years, and then they have to be peer-reviewed, and then they have to be replicated. So we're only now beginning to see some of the effects that the smartphones are having on our brains. And it's not great. For example, they did a study in the UK in which they had hundreds of people come in and sit down and have a conversation with strangers. And then afterwards, they would ask them, okay, tell us about the other person. What were they like? Were they friendly? Blah, 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 blah. In half of those conversations, they would come and they would just place a cell phone down on the table. It belonged to neither person. It never made a noise. But in those conversations in which there was a cell phone present and visible, they were 62% more likely to come out and say the other person was unempathetic, unfriendly, untrustworthy, and unlikable. Now I want you to think about how many times you've gone to lunch with somebody and just set your cell phone down on the table and you felt good because you didn't look at it. The thing is, it's having an effect on their brain because they can see it. And the other side of that is, it's having an effect on your brain because part of your brain, they say about 10% of your brain is thinking about that cell phone. It's basically in fight or flight mode, ready for it to make a noise. Which means, if you are sit at your desk and you're one of the people that habitually keeps your email client open all the time, like always has Outlook open, your IQ drops by 10 points. Because part of your brain is thinking about the email. It is occupied in wondering, it's making sure it's ready for that notification to come in. So again, I'm not telling you to get rid of your cell phone, I'm just saying put it away. When it's time to have a conversation, put it away. Don't put it down, put it away. It's not about getting rid of technology and becoming the Unabomber in a shack. It's about being aware of the power of that technology and being smart about it. It's not about not letting technology do the things we're bad at. It's about reclaiming the things we do better than anybody else. Reclaiming what is basically our humanity. And there's more really, really mind-blowing research. My favorite researcher, and my son would tell you that just shows what a dork I am because I have a favorite researcher, is a guy named Nicholas Epley. And he has been researching these intangibles of human nature for years. And just recently, a few months ago, he did this very long study, not just Nicholas, but a whole crew of people. But what he found was that when we read an opinion we disagree with in any form, it doesn't matter if it's printed in a newspaper, a book, an email, Facebook, if we read it, we are much more likely to think we disagree because that person's stupid and ignorant of the real issues. If we hear someone telling us the same opinion, whether it's recorded in a podcast, doesn't matter. If we hear their voice telling us that opinion, we are much more likely to think they disagree with us because they have a different experience and perspective. And what that means is that the human voice is literally humanizing. It is the voice itself, some quality of the human voice, that helps us to recognize each other as human beings, deserving of respect. And we do deserve respect. Every person deserves respect. Not every opinion, but every person. And it also means that this process that we're going through right now of transferring all of our communication to the digital world is dehumanizing us. Of course, we hate each other. We don't see each other as human beings deserving of respect. And this is not a partisan issue. If you're thinking, yeah, absolutely, those liberals, they're always jerks. Or the other way, it doesn't matter what you're thinking. It's not partisan. Every single person is equally prone to do this to the other side. Every person is equally prone to confirmation bias. Do you guys know what confirmation bias is? It's where you believe something, and then someone gives you evidence proving that belief is wrong, and it makes you believe it harder. We are the only species that suffers from confirmation bias. And that is because confirmation bias is not helpful. Well, it's not really helpful. If you have a cat, and the cat truly believes there's no cats in the next room, a mouse, sorry. If you have a mouse, and the mouse totally believes there's no cats in the next room, and you show them evidence of cats in the next room, lots of cats, and that makes the mouse believe harder there are no cats in the next room, mice would basically be wiped off the face of the planet. So you have to ask yourself, why do we have confirmation bias? Why do all of us have confirmation bias? And how does it help us? Because frankly, why would it survive through all those millennia of evolution if it did not in some way help? And I'll tell you what I believe, even though we fully don't understand it yet. I think confirmation bias is actually a strength. I think what it does is prove to us constantly that we need each other, that we need to talk to each other, because we are our own checks and balances. I need you guys to tell me when I've said something nutballs, and I need to believe you. We need each other, all of us. There is no virtue in saying, I don't talk to people like that. It's not a virtue. I don't care how vile you think their opinion is. That's not something to brag about. You can talk to everybody. And I'll just give you two examples. One of them is Georgia's own. Does anyone know who Zernona Clayton is? One person. There's a street named after her in Atlanta. Zernona Clayton was a good friend of the Kings, Dr. King and his wife, Coretta. When they decided to create the Great Neighborhoods Initiative, Great Society Initiative to strengthen neighborhoods here in Atlanta, she was appointed as the head of that program. And she had a whole bunch of different neighborhood captains. And the mayor came to her and said, Zernona, listen, I have to warn you, because Zernona was an African-American, still is an African-American woman. That hasn't changed. He said, I have to warn you that one of your neighborhood captains is a Grand Dragon in the KKK. Just so you know. And she describes that very first meeting where all the captains came in and one of them refused to touch her or shake her hand. And she goes, oh, that's the one. So he would come in from time to time and sit in her office downtown, and she would talk to him about whatever. And she says Dr. King told her, you don't try to change hearts. Leave that to God. You have no control over whether a heart is changed. You don't have that power. But you can be a human being and respectful. And so that's what she did. And they would talk to each other. He ended up coming sometimes 2 or 3 times a week and just sat down. And at one point she asked him, why do you keep coming here? You don't even like me. And he says, I know, but I like to talk to you. And about a year later, after all of this, he held a press conference and he renounced his membership in the KKK. And he said, it's because this woman you've probably never heard of, Zenona Clayton. Because I was wrong. And I'll give you one more example. Another black guy, African American, he's a jazz pianist, plays a mean stride piano. His name's Daryl Davis. There's a PBS documentary about him called Accidental Courtesy. And what Daryl Davis does in his off time is convince people to leave the KKK and hate organizations. And he's so successful at it that he almost dismantled single-handedly the KKK operation in the state of Maryland. And people ask him, what do you say? Like, what is it you're saying to convince them? And he's like, I don't say anything. In fact, and he said, and this is really important, he said, by actively listening to them, I am passively teaching them about myself. And sometimes people just need to be heard. And this is what I would say to you. After telling you you can't change people's minds, after Dr. King said you can't change anybody's hearts, and that's true. Sometimes. Sometimes the act of listening can be such a gift. It can be such an act of love that over time, you may not even be aware of when it happens. Over time, you can change people. And more importantly, you can be changed by listening and by being heard. We have about 25 minutes left. I can keep talking, but there are usually a lot of questions. So I'm going to go ahead and take questions if you have them. If there aren't any, I will keep going.
Celeste, over here, far back.
Oh, I see.
Right here, yes. A couple of years ago, you came to Savannah, and you did a TED Talk. Mm-hmm. And it was one of the best ever.
Thank you. 13 million views, ladies and gentlemen.
Tell us, if you would, something you learned doing a TED Talk.
Next time, get a haircut and put on makeup. That is what I learned. Other people will be watching this. Brush your hair. Yes. Oh, wait, they want me to bring, Oh, here and here. They're going to bring you a microphone.
Get you on the list.
Okay, you talked a lot about the challenges to great conversations,
Yes.
but you didn't say anything specific about how to have great conversations.
Well, that's because I wrote a book about it. And it took me a long time. No, I mean, the number one challenge to having a great conversation is listening, right? And it's not just a matter of none of you are going to leave here and go, she's right, I'm going to be a great listener from now on. Here's the thing. Human beings are not born knowing how to listen well. We're just not. It's not something we do well as a species. And anyone who's been around a baby knows that, right? You don't come out of the womb knowing how to listen. You come out of the womb knowing how to scream, and some of us never stop. Listening has to be taught. That's the secret. How many of you were offered at some point a public speaking course in your lives? How many of you were offered a listening course in your life? Yeah, like 2. It really is, it's something you have to learn. right? Quite literally. This is incredible research coming out of the school systems in Australia and New Zealand that shows the only way to become a better listener is to actually work at it. It takes discipline. It's one of those things, it's not like information that you just master and learn and memorize and then move on. It's like going to the gym. Like nobody goes to the gym, gets a great pump, and then you're done working out for the rest of your life. That is listening. It is exercising a muscle that is not naturally strong. So get in there every day.
How does the brain react to the voice of artificial intelligence?
We don't have a lot of good research on there right now, like Alexa. If you talk to Alexa, we don't really react to it the way that we do to a human being. And believe me, I'm one of the consultants for Amazon trying to teach them how to make Alexa have real conversations. And an unpaid consultant, I might add. Because what am I going to say? We don't know. We don't have any way at this point of measuring what it is that we're responding to in a human voice. So we don't actually know what's missing in the AI. But it is missing. Neural coupling does not occur between an AI and a human being, regardless of that movie. Her, or she, what was the name of that movie? Yeah, she has a question here.
So I'm going to go buy 3 of your books and give it to 3 of my family members and give them 3 instructions from you. Listen was one, but what would the other 2 be?
The other one obviously would be put away your cell phone. Put it away. And the last one would be if you're not able to have the conversation right then, walk away. If you can't focus and you can't listen, that's fair. That's fine. Just excuse yourself. Don't put the other person through the pain of talking to you when you can't listen. Don't waste their time. Just walk away. Politely. Other questions? Don't you worry, I got plenty more I can say.
So there are a lot of people I'm a millennial, and there are a lot of people in my generation, and I'm sure the one below us now that would...
The iGen, they're calling it.
Right. That's scary. But they would argue that they are having meaningful conversations over text and over social media. And, what would you say to them? I know you're not supposed to change people's minds, but how would you approach that subject?
I'd say you're wrong. I mean, you can't just tell me what you feel. Show me the proof, right? And there is 0 data. I mean, the scientific opinion on texting and emailing is as universal as the opinion on climate change. It's wrong. A texting is not a conversation. And in fact, they have found that even your closest friends and family members are no more accurate at detecting sarcasm in your emails than a complete stranger off the street. And here's the thing. When I tell people that, they go, oh, I totally believe that. Except me, my friends totally know. And I say, that's not how math works. That is not how math works. We are great at figuring out what other people do wrong. We are excellent at it. But the fact of the matter is, we're terrible at being good judges of what we're doing wrong and what we're not. There's this book called You Are Not So Smart. It's also a podcast. If you're ever feeling really confident, just read that book. It's okay. It's true of all of us, even like really brilliant people. It's true of everybody. But the thing is that it's just wrong. A text is not a conversation. And you may be thinking you're communicating well, but you're not saying what they're hearing. They're hearing and reading something different from what you have typed. And miscommunication is the #1 cause of project failure in business, mostly because of email. It costs $210 trillion a year. Yeah, if you want to put it in dollars and cents.
As a child, I remember hearing children are to be seen and not heard. And
Amen. No, I'm kidding.
children are told to keep quiet their entire school years. Is that part of why we don't talk anymore and we secretly
think so.
communicate?
I don't think so. I mean, you're told to keep quiet in class because there's too many kids all wanting to say their own thing, and it would be mayhem if they were all talking. That's what recess is for, right? I mean, it's the same thing in college courses. I mean, everyone can't just sit there and talk while the professor's trying to lecture. You've got to be able to hear them. And not only that, but that has been the norm for as far back as we have records. I'm not saying children should be seen and not heard. Come on. But that's okay. When someone's actually lecturing, I mean, if you guys were all talking right now, there would be a brawl because the person next to you'd be like, I'm trying to hear, and the other person's like, shut up, I'm talking to my mom. And then there'd be fighting, and it would be like that church scene in The Kingsman. People who've seen the movie know what I'm talking about. There's times when you shouldn't talk, plenty of them. But we're not talking about that. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about actual conversations, which we're not having anymore. What we're having is exchanges where one person says what they think and believe, and the other person says what they think and believe, but they're not actually listening to each other. A conversation is an exchange of information. It's one person speaking, another listening and responding, and then speaking, and then going back. That we're not having that anymore. And that's certainly not what a tweet is. We need fewer hot takes. Question.
I heard your TED Talk. It was wonderful, and thank you. You did make a wonderful comparison, I think, from your sister, A Good Conversation and a Short Skirt. I'll let you do that one. But I do have a question here. I think I assumed, bad of me, that your book was going to be more anecdotal, and it sounds like it's really solidly researched and based on data. How long did it take you to do this, to do the research and write it?
Well, a long time. I think there's probably like 30 pages of footnotes at the end. It's not fully just science. It's basically split into three kind of chunks. There's plenty of anecdotal, because I admit all the things I do wrong, which could have filled another book. And then there's the science behind what we know. And then there's what I learned in my professional experience as a broadcaster and a professional interviewer. It's kind of split evenly between those three things. So it takes a lot, but one of the reasons it takes so long is because when I first set out to become a better interviewer, that was my initial effort years and years ago. I went to those same research books that all of us have been reading for years, you know, the ones that say, look them in the eye and nod your head and say, to show that you're listening. And it's crap. That is crap advice. I don't even know if those people actually followed their own advice. It doesn't work. It doesn't work. If you're sitting there staring into someone's eyes and making eye contact, it's uncomfortable, isn't it? It doesn't work. And so I had to start from scratch. And sometimes I had to reach into research fields in science that wasn't about communication in order to get my answers. I had to sort of just forget what I knew or thought I knew about the subject. And also, what the hell did those people, what were they writing about? Like, I don't even understand. Like, there's no way they followed that advice and it made their conversations better. There's no way. It's just literally teaching you how to act like you are listening. It is. That's what all that advice is about. Here's how you pretend you're paying attention. When the most authentic way to do that is pay attention. It's totally believable. So, yeah, and the quote you're talking about is actually a version of originally a Winston Churchill quote, which says, a good conversation is like a mini skirt, long enough to cover the subject and short enough to retain interest. Yeah. Winston Churchill would say something like that. Jonathan. Oh, okay. Hi.
Hi. I'm in adult education, and one of the things that we continue to learn is that lecture style learning is the most ineffective.
Yeah.
So kinesthetic learning, where people are actively engaged,
Yeah.
is more, how do you have a conversation that includes that active component?
Well, lecturing and trying to educate people is the death of good conversation. Honestly, it goes along with not trying to change their minds. If your intent is to educate someone, you're not having a good conversation. I mean, the first thing is you've basically screwed with the power dynamic because you've put yourself above them. You've made yourself their teacher, which is why there's one part in the book where I will almost never tell you what to say or what not to say because it's completely situational. And if you're paying attention, you'll know what to say. But the one phrase I want people to stop saying is actually. But actually, it's like, I'm not a racist, but nothing good will come after it. If you feel yourself wanting to say, but actually, just stop. Just stop yourself. You don't need to explain. And I think the example I use in the book is like, you're not making the dinner any better to interrupt what someone's saying to explain that real champagne only comes from France, right? I mean, come on. Just let it go. Let it go. Yeah. And it's the same thing in learning. I mean, what we're finding is that we know all kinds of ways to shut a brain down. And a human mind is already really prone to distraction. Microsoft does some of the best research around into attention span. And what they've discovered is that on the internet, at least, our attention span is about 8 seconds, which is 1 second shorter than that of a goldfish. In conversation, our attention span is about 30 to 60 seconds. So when you leave here, get something that has a second hand, a timer, and start telling a story and see how long 30 seconds gets you through. And then stop, because it's a good chance their attention span has expired. And the other side to that is the human brain can only hold on to 3 or 4 things at any one time. So if you're one of those people that starts talking to your spouse and is like, and another thing, and you're just kind of going through all the stuff, you are spitting in the wind, my friend. Choose one thing. Choose one thing and say it in 30 to 60 seconds. And then be done and walk away. And everyone will be happier. Yeah. Oh, yeah, hi. Yes.
I'm not trying to break line.
You're good.
I was always told in reading business books and advice from people who know that one should stick to their knitting. That is, know what business you're in and stick to that. Why on earth would you change your appearance when your last TED Talk gained 13 million listeners or viewers? I watched your TED Talk last night and decided I have to go see this woman. And I'm a little disappointed because, frankly, I didn't think it was all about cell phones, but I understand everything you're saying. My daughter, I forward it. Yeah, there's a question.
It's just a wife.
Have you considered the multiplication of technology? I'm talking about text messages or forwarding Twitter stuff. I forwarded something. My daughter unfriended me. And I called her and I said, listen, this is what I was trying to say. And she said, oh, the human voice brought it all together. So I apologize.
Was there a question? Why would I change it? I didn't. I just put it in a clip. I lied about me learning that.
Because we're more reticent to communicate with each other in conversation, and that's making people more reliant on texting and so forth. Has there been any studies that says we now read differently? I mean, in the old days, you used to learn empathy by reading novels.
You still do. You still do.
But are we not as good as we used to be as readers?
That's a complicated question.
Thank you.
We are not as good readers, meaning that we don't have an attention span for reading the way we used to. And if you look at the amount, how much of an article the average person actually reads before they click away to another link, or how long a book is from an unestablished author that people will actually read to the end, we do not read as much as we used to. But we have also found that the #1 way to teach people critical thinking and reading and how to speak well is to read to them. The benefits that we get from reading have not changed. And it is still true that you can learn empathy by reading novels about people whose experiences are different from your own. The #1 most effective way to learn to increase your empathy, and this is important because empathy can be increased or decreased. And empathy has been on the decline now for 30 years. In fact, it's dropped 40% in the past 30 years. Most of that has been since the year 2000. But it can be increased. And the #1 most efficient way to do that is by having a conversation with someone else in which you learn about their experiences and their perspectives. It is no small thing, even when you disagree with them. It's helping you. And I tell people all the time, stop thinking about the benefit you're conferring on someone else by listening to them. It's good for you. Small talk makes you live longer, makes you less likely to have a fatal cardiac event. It makes you less prone to depression. Being friendly with your neighbors makes you less prone to diabetes. It makes you less prone to all kinds of diseases. And yet I have a friend of mine who drove around the block twice because his neighbor was out front and he didn't want to pull in while he was there and get in a conversation with him. Those little chats with your Uber drivers and your grocery store clerks about nothing are literally making you healthier. So by staring down at your phone so that they don't make eye contact and they don't start talking to you, you are hurting yourself. Other questions?
No, when the comment was made that younger folks might feel that they're communicating just as effectively when they're communicating on their cell phone, the first thing you said was, that's not true. Science has shown blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
However, feelings, I feel this way, is legitimate in terms of how I'm approaching that conversation. You seem to stop the conversation at that point and said, well, that's not true. This is the facts. Facts don't seem to be as important anymore as feelings.
Oh, not to me.
I feel, but
I have nothing but respect for people's feelings, but it doesn't change fact. I mean, I can feel all I want that I have written an email and it's really good communication. From my end, that may be true. I may have expressed myself in a way that I'm perfectly happy with, and I think it is rewarding to me. The question is, in a good exchange of information, did the other person get an accurate reading of what it was that I was trying to say? In other words, was the information communicated clearly? And did I express myself in a way that was effective? That they don't need further explanation in order to understand what he was trying to say. And the fact is, texting, that doesn't mean every single text is not a good exchange. And in fact, it's a perfectly great platform for a simple exchange of information. What do you want for dinner? Chinese food. Okay. Fine. But I can't make it to your birthday party. So sorry. Nope.
But then how do you effectively use the facts that you're aware of from scientific literature to confront that confirmational bias of the other individual?
I don't confront people's confirmation bias.
You just did. I mean, somebody said, I communicated equally well, if not better, on my cell phone.
No, he was saying other people think that he knows, right? You were saying other young people believe that, not that you believe that? Yeah.
But what if I came to you and said, I believe that?
I would say, you probably do feel that, but it's not correct. We got 4 minutes. Another question?
I enjoyed your talk very much.
Thank you.
Is there any mystery to why it seems like these Alexa and things like that are in the female voice, or it seems very predominant.
This is actually quite interesting. People get irritated when it's a male telling them. For whatever reason, and Amazon believes it's because of the maternal nature of much of the instruction that most people get when they're growing up, that they tend to be more accepting of someone telling them your timer's up or it's time to go to bed or whatever it is when it's a woman telling them, whereas when it's a guy telling them, it's like, I will say, here's an interesting thing that's not part of your question. Amazon has now made it so that if you are rude in a misogynist way to Alexa, she shuts off. She turns herself off if you call her the C word or anything like it. She will not engage.
Back to reading. Is there any scientific information on what you comprehend reading off of a computer versus what you comprehend when you're reading a book or a newspaper? I've been saying it's a generational thing because I do not comprehend as well off of the computer as I do something.
Yeah, that's just habit. They haven't really found, some of the best research is going on at UC Berkeley. They have a Greater Good Center, which is one of the places we're doing incredible work on this, not only this kind of topic, but also on empathy. And that's more of it depends on what you like, right? Like, I like an actual physical book, and I like library books because they smell like library books. But my kid is just fine reading off the computer. He gets the same information. So, writing, though, you need the actual physical act of writing in order for it to ever make it to your memory banks, just FYI. If you type notes in a class, it doesn't actually get to your memory banks.
That's exactly where I was going with my question. Is letter writing different from email?
So this is interesting. There are a few things that email does better than regular communication. We only have 1 minute, so I'm going to make this really quick. One of them is sending an attachment for obvious reasons. Another one is sending like a list or an agenda or maybe a summation of a meeting, or a phone call. We had a phone call. Here's what I heard. And the other thing that we found is that an email is a perfectly good replacement for what would have been a long letter that you wrote. Now, you don't get the benefits of physically writing it except in Microsoft OneNote, where I can write on my tablet with my pen. And then I do get the benefits. But other than that, there's no diminution in the benefits of them receiving that letter and reading it on email. Same thing. Yeah, thank you all very much.